What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome. I am super stoked to have you. Have you picked up your paperback copy of Beyond UX Design, Master Your Craft Beyond Pixels and Prototypes yet? Unlock the secrets of UX success and learn all the things they didn't teach you in school. Listen until the end for an exclusive code to get 10% off your copy. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/book to learn more. This week's episode is brought to you by Jeff White and his UX Storytelling Toolkit. Now, lots of people talk about the importance of storytelling, but Jeff brings actionable clarity to storytelling, and he shows you exactly how to do it. He breaks down different real-world scenarios like how to use storytelling methods to present your work, how to craft a better case study, and how to prep for job interviews. And I love Jeff's approach to storytelling here. It's not your simple once-upon-a-time kind of stuff. And since you're an amazing listener, and I know this course will help you a ton, I'm stoked to get everybody listening a 10% discount if you use the code BeyondUX when you check out. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/storytelling and use the code BeyondUX to get 10% off Jeff's course. So learn some incredible techniques to influence your team and advance your UX career. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. If you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Sarah, Quan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, and Marty for all their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. You can get instant access to those videos right now for as little as $5 a month. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then tell your mom and them. That would be wonderful. So I got a question for you out there, listeners. Do you squirm in your seat when asked to introduce yourself? In meetings, do you keep quiet even though you have something to say? Boss often tell you speak up more, but you're not sure how? Well, just because you're quiet doesn't mean you have nothing to say. And if you answered yes, you might be a quiet achiever. You might recognize, by the way, Tim as one of the guest contributors to the Beyond UX Design Mastercraft Beyond Pixels and Prototype 2nd edition. You don't have to fit into the extrovert mold to succeed at work. And my guest today, Tim Yeo, has written the book for introverts to succeed and get ahead without pretending to be extroverts. And we're going to dig all on that today. I'm so excited. Tim Yeo is the chief introvert of the Quiet Achiever. He coaches and runs the Quiet Achiever School to help quiet achievers have impact at work without pretending to be extroverts. Tim spent 18 years as a designer and design leader, most recently design director at IBM. Previously, Tim was the head of UX and design at fintech startups Finder, OFX, and Prospo, where he hired, established, and scaled design teams from scratch. Best known for saying complex things simply, he's also a keynote speaker, bookbinder, and published his book, The Quiet Achiever, working remotely from his farm in Adelaide, Australia with his partner and the fluffiest old English sheepdog ever. Tim, welcome to Beyond UX Design. I am so excited to finally have you on. How's it going, man?
Jeremy, is going well. It's morning over here in Australia, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, dude. So we've got almost like a 12-hour time difference. What time is it for you there? It's 4 p.m. here.
Well, it's about 8 a.m. here.
8 a.m. Okay, so I don't know. I'm not good at math. That's not 12 hours, but it's quite the difference. And we have been struggling to try to figure out how to get it so both of us can meet. I'm glad we finally did it. I mentioned this before, but you helped contribute to the Beyond UX Design book. So anybody out there who hasn't picked up the book yet, make sure to check that out for a quick little snippet on how to do some small talk. But Tim has written the book for introverts, and we're going to talk all about that today. I am so excited to have you on. So Tim, I know I read your bio a little bit, but tell us about you. You've got quite a career, doing a lot of really awesome stuff. Tell us a little bit about you and how did you ultimately get to write The Quiet Achiever?
Yeah, sure. So I've been a designer for the last 18, 20 years, and half of that time has been spent working in-house, and half of that time has been working at startups or at consultancies, where I've always found myself to be in rooms with people with strong opinions and loud voices. During my career, I had to learn how to navigate and work with those kinds of people, because growing up, I actually started my career in Singapore, and that's also where I grew up. Okay. And if you've ever been to Singapore, it's an Asian society, and the culture where I grew up in was one where you only speak up when you have something meaningful to say. Fast forward maybe 12 years ago when I moved to Australia, which is a Western culture. I found myself in a place where speaking up was really a sign of engagement. Speaking up is contributing to a meeting, even when the idea that you have is not fully formed yet. It's not a Western, Eastern kind of thing strictly. It really also depends on the culture they work in. But I certainly do find that in a Western culture, people tend to speak up before they are sure whether what they're saying is true or not. It's certainly
Yeah.
much more extroverted than the kind of environment that I used to come from. And so even as I started here, I started thinking to myself, what's wrong with me? Why is it that everyone else seems to make it look so easy? They seem to be able to come up with things on the fly. And for a long time, I always thought there was something wrong with me. Even though deep down, working in my craft and design, I always felt like I wanted to lead. There's something to contribute back to the craft and to the people that I work with. So I started looking for role models of what good leadership looks like. And if you actually as you look for examples and role models of what leaders look like, I'm not sure about you, but when I looked at this, even today, so many of the role models that we see out there of what leadership looks like tends to fit the extrovert ideal. They are people who can give speeches at the drop of a hat, people who are loud, people who are able to think on their feet. And when I look at these role models and then I look at myself honestly in the mirror, I say to myself, that's not me. And there was a time in my career where I pretended. I thought, you know what, if I wanted to lead, then this is who I needed to be. And honestly, Jeremy, for a while it worked. I practiced so hard at pretending to be like other people, and it worked.
Yeah.
But I was exhausted. Every single time that I was pretending, I felt like I was putting on a mask. I was not being who I authentically was. And it wasn't until I really hit rock bottom and just got so tired, sick and tired of actually pretending to somebody else, that I said to myself, you know what, there has to be another way. I can't keep going on this way. I have to find my own path to success, something that feels a lot more natural, because I was very passionate about my craft. I really did enjoy what I was doing, but I couldn't behave the way that culture or the teams that I worked in, I couldn't continue to behave in that way. That was just simply exhausting. So I found that actually what I came to realize was a lot of the little things that I was doing, all those tiny habits, preferring to have conversations one-on-one rather than having big meetings all the time. Thinking about how I can network online more so than networking in real life. These days, I feel like I can do both. I certainly prefer networking online a lot more. Small things like this. If I actually took all these tiny habits and I did them well, over time, the impact that I have will accumulate over time. And in a nutshell, that's really what the book is about. That's my approach to having impact as an introvert without having to pretend to be somebody else, which is tiny habits done well, accumulated over time. So I might pass that over back to you.
What I find interesting about the book, The Quiet Achiever, you don't ever mention introverts really, right? In the title at least. And I know you call it introverts throughout the book, but as I was reading it and I'm thinking to myself, there's a lot of things here, non-introverts, ways that extroverts things that they could also take away. And I want to talk a little bit about this more in a second, but I'm curious, did you write the book thinking about specifically introverts, or was this just sort of trying to be more broad? Did you have like a specific audience in mind? Was it just for introverts, or were you thinking more broadly in general about just designers and professionals, maybe even working remotely? Because I feel like there's a lot here that's just for remote teams, even too, that you could take away. Anyway, I'm just curious what you thought. Did you think about that, or is that just happy accident after COVID and stuff? Kind of.
Well, first of all, I'm an introvert, and this is the only reality that I know. I can pretend to be an extrovert. I have pretended to be an extrovert, but I really don't know what it's like being somebody else for real. So I do know this works for me. I've also coached and also worked with a lot of quiet achievers or introverts, and it seems to work for them as well. But I think I suspect you identify as an extrovert, isn't it, Jeremy? And for
Wait,
the
say
extroverts,
no. Sorry.
I suspect you identify as an extrovert, Jeremy.
I think I do. I'm very loud.
The
Yeah.
extroverts that I've spoken to, they feel the same way. They feel like, you know what, these are things that can work for me as well, which is great. It's
Yeah.
a really good, nice side effect. The second thing I'll say is, did I really target this for designers, people who do what I do? I was thinking about this as I was writing a book, and I asked myself, because over the years, I've actually spoken to engineers, product managers, I've spoken to people who work in white collar jobs. I've spoken to people who need to work in teams. And I found that a lot of these skills are actually applicable to them as well. I mean, if you were a solo creator, you were a full stack designer, engineer, and you could do everything on your own and you don't have to work with anybody else, then sure, maybe you don't need this book as much as other people. But certainly, if you do have to go out, even if you're buying milk from the grocery store and you struggle with small talk, or you need to go to a networking event to meet new people and to grow your network, then sure, there's a use case in this book here for you as well.
Yeah.
And I think the third point that I'll make is about the word introvert and the word quiet achiever specifically. When I was writing this book, I was considering having the word introvert in the title. But then I decided against it. Because what I've noticed is, as I started talking to a lot of introverts in my coaching and in my day-to-day, I found that there's a book called Quiet, and it's by the author Susan Cain. And she explains this really well in her book. She says that we live in a world where the extrovert ideal is desired. And that's the world that we all live in, that a picture of a leader is an extrovert and etc. It's the role model of what a picture of good will look like to some kinds of people. And what I found is that as I talk to a lot of introverts, there's a lot of weight in the word introvert itself. And it's not always a positive thing. Introversion to them might be seen as a flaw. It might be seen as a mistake. It might be seen as something that needs to be rid of.
Wow.
And I didn't want a case where the book might be good for somebody. I didn't want a case where just because it had introvert in the title, that they will actually say, no, this is not a book for me. I don't want to be an introvert. If anything, I want to be the extrovert ideal. I didn't want the word and the language and the label to simply limit them from the good things that the book might actually help them with. Funnily enough, when I was a manager, and I found myself writing this in a lot of performance reviews for the people that reported to me. And it was a phrase, quiet achiever, because that speaks to their nature, being quiet, but also speaks to their ambition, which is they want to achieve. Just because we're quiet doesn't mean that we don't have ambition. It's just a different way, and the way that it shows up can be different. So very intentionally, I chose the phrase quiet achiever rather than introvert because of the world that we live in and what people might behave.
Right. So let's talk about this a little bit from your experience as someone who spent their career an introvert trying to pretend to be an extrovert. I imagine there are certain things that you saw extroverts receive, special benefits or accolades or something, and so you wanted to try to get to that place. And as you just said, introverts often is seen as sort of a negative thing. And I'm curious, from your perspective as an introvert, how do you feel being an introvert versus being an extrovert impacts your job? Let's just not even say as a designer, just as a white collar professional having maybe a tech job. How do you see sort of introverts versus extroverts being compared often at work? Do you often see this sort of one being seen as negative versus the other? And I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, I can think of a few things. The first thing that comes to mind is that many of the designers, engineers, people who write code, many of those people that I've met have tended to be quieter or introverted in nature. And when you think about it, that's actually makes perfect sense. If your day-to-day job requires you to be sitting quietly for hours, pushing pixels on screen, writing code with your headphones on, if this is your happy place, if this is the kind of work that you enjoy doing, then very naturally it's going to attract a lot of people who are quieter in nature like myself. It doesn't apply to everyone. Sure, you're designing yourself, Jeremy, and you're an extrovert. And that totally works as well. It's not excluding, but it just tends to be more people who are quieter in nature actually gravitate towards this as an occupation. The second thing I think about comes from Dr. Adam Grant, where he spoke about research shows that there's something called the Babel effect. And what that means is the people who tend to speak up more, simply speaking up more, tend to be called out as the leaders of a group more often than people who are quieter. And they tend to then take up leadership positions because simply of how they behave. And it's called the Babel effect. Notice very clearly, it doesn't talk about anything about the substance of what the person is saying. But the simple fact that they actually speak up more, that actually identifies them as a leader, and they get put into positions of leadership more frequently and more often than people who are quieter in nature. So that's the second thing that came to mind. Is this fair? Is the person getting into those positions worthy of that position? Yes and no. It depends. Again,
Right.
everything that we discussed up until now hasn't been about the substance or the thing that the person is actually talking about. It is simply the behavior, the skill they've exhibited that have got them into those positions. So I'm curious what comes to mind as I'm saying that to you now, Jeremy.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned that because I've seen the same kind of thing, and I don't know that I've ever heard Adam Grant talk about the Babel effect, but when you said it, I just got to laugh. I just sort of laughed a little bit because it's just like they babble, they talk, and they they just the word vomit just comes out or whatever before they ever actually think about what they're saying. They're talking and they're maybe forming an opinion as they're speaking. But I've seen the same thing that you have talked about, which is, the extroverts tend to be in your face. They tend to be, they tend to be more known throughout the organization. They tend to be the ones that people think of, not necessarily because they are any better at their jobs or they're better leaders, but it's because it's the recency effect, most likely. I would imagine. I'm thinking about cognitive biases. They're probably the most the recent person who said something, and so the leaders tend to think of them first. And that's kind of been my experience. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. There's a saying. We say that for a reason. It's because who are loud and obnoxious, or maybe not obnoxious, but loud and present, tend to be the ones that tend to get ahead.
And you know what? Yeah. A lot of thought leadership. The truth is, it's going to require a lot more communication. And these will be skills. Again, I say skills. These will be skills that an extrovert is very well practiced in, because you know what? These are things that give you energy. So you've done more of this in your life. For quiet achievers or introverts, maybe these are things that actually drain their energy a lot more. So naturally, they do it less. So whether it's more or whether it's less, it comes back to a matter of practice.
Yeah.
And if you can practice more, then your skill gets better. It's not a question of your identity. It is not who you are. It is simply a skill. And if you can practice that skill, you can get better. And you can achieve the things that you want to.
Yeah. So I love that idea of it being a skill, because that implies, just like you said, that you can practice, that you can get better. And I think when you tend to put people in buckets, and this goes back to what we talked about before about introvert versus extrovert. And when, you label yourself as an introvert, a lot of times people are just like, well, I'm never going to be good at talking. I'm never going to be good at this, and I'm never going to be good at that. But framing it as a skill, I love that, because that implies you can practice. That implies that you can get better. And that implies that you can, master this thing over time. And I find that empowering in a way. I really like that. So let me ask you this. Ways that an introvert can then practice these things so they can, I don't know, appear as an extrovert, or maybe not even appear as an extrovert, just be that person, takes advantage of the recency bias, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? How does an introvert get to that point?
Well, let's talk about the categories of skills, right? So within the book itself, I tried to organize it in a way about how I thought were skills that were important if you wanted to be a quiet achiever. And some of these skills, you might not even think of them as skills at all, but they are important. So let's talk about a few of them. The one that most frequently comes up is public speaking. How do I speak publicly well? Every single time I'm on the center of attention, I feel nervous. I feel like a deer in headlights. How do I do it well? People talk about how to introduce themselves. Every time you meet somebody new, you got to introduce themselves. But sometimes I find myself, in a meeting, let's say on the first day, joining a new team at a new company. Why don't we go around the room and introduce ourselves? This is one of the most awkward moments for people like myself because we don't know what to say. Name a fun fact about yourself. Share one fun fact, and then there I am sitting in that meeting counting down the number of people before it reaches me, and I'm like, oh my god, what's a fun fact about myself? Like, do I even know who I am? Am I even fun? It's struggling on the spot to come up with things to say when I'm introducing myself is another challenge. We also talk about things in the book like how to handle difficult how to handle difficult conversations, how to deal with feedback that you don't like, how to give feedback. Because it is through feedback you can then make the thing that you're making better. How to say no politely, how to network. Networking, a lot of people think about networking as going into big rooms of people that you don't know. And I'm not sure about you, Jeremy, but when that happens to me and I'm at a networking event in real life with other people, I am usually that awkward, quiet person that's standing in the corner of the room with a glass in hand, quietly scanning the room, hoping that somebody will make eye contact with me. And it's super awkward. When I'm there, I'm often thinking, why did I even come in the first place? I should have just stayed home doing my own thing. So it covers a lot of these different topics, and these are topics that time and time again I've always struggled with when in coaching quiet achievers. The same thing that they struggle with. Again, any one of these topics taken on their own, they do not look like much. But when you actually put it all together, there's an opportunity for you to have the kind of impact that you want in a way that feels very authentic. You don't feel like you're faking it anymore. You feel as if you are actually making a difference when you're actually adding up the sum of all of these habits when you practice again and again and again, day to day, every day, in you doing your role. And that's really the approach I've taken. It's not about that singular moment where you're standing in front of your entire company and delivering this rousing speech. Sure, moments like this do happen, and you do have to perform. But at the same time, moments like this are rare. What really counts, in my opinion, is being able to practice these skills day to day, in the smallest of meetings to the biggest of meetings, on the smallest of occasions to the biggest of occasions. Being able to do this on a regular basis, over time, your impact is going to grow and your influence is going to grow. And then one day you're going to wake up and you're going to say, you know what? I feel like I've arrived. I've done all the things that I've managed to do. And I've done it in a way that feels natural and authentic to me. And this is the kind of success that I hope everyone can have.
I love that. See, here's something interesting. As an extrovert, someone who, I don't know, does one get diagnosed as an extrovert? I don't know how that works. So I guess you either think you're an extrovert or you don't. But as someone who, I guess we'll say it this way, feels more comfortable talking in front of people and talking in meetings and things like that. The thing that I love about the book and what you talk about is you sort of give tips to people on how to do some of these things, right? From the perspective of someone who might feel uncomfortable doing some of these things. But on the other end, as someone who might talk a lot, who is very boisterous, who might be seen as, on the negative side, obnoxious, right? If the negative side of introvert is too quiet, I think the negative side of extrovert is just obnoxious and just in your face and kind of annoying. And so I think there's an opportunity for the extroverts to think about how they approach small talk so that they're not just talking constantly, right? Or how do extroverts approach networking so they're not the ones that are just like loud and obnoxious and kind of like intimidating to other people, or public speaking or speaking in a meeting so they're not speaking over people. And so I don't know if you could talk about that a little bit, but I feel like that's a really beautiful thing from this book, is that it gives tips for people who might feel uncomfortable, but at the same time, the same tips can be applied to some of those people who might not even realize that they're doing some of those things.
Mm.
I don't know. Have you thought about that? I don't know if you thought about that as you were writing the book, but that's something that I kind of took away from that. No? What do you think?
So people back home in Singapore and Asia, small talk doesn't really happen. And I learned that when I came to Australia in the Western culture, it happens everywhere. You can be waiting for a bus, a tram, a train, even waiting for the public bathroom. Small talk can just suddenly creep up on you. And it's awkward. It used to be very awkward to me. So I had to make sense and I had to find a way to make awkward a lot more natural, something that can come to me a lot more quickly. So essentially what that boils down to is frameworks and skills, right? Yeah. And frameworks and skills can be practiced by people like yourself or myself. One of the frameworks we talk about in the book is to use Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a framework for making small talk. Maslow's hierarchy of needs has 5 levels. You got physiological security, love and belonging, self-actualization right at the top. One of the key things when you're making small talk and the purpose of small talk is really before the real talk actually begins. You want to be able to use that time to build a connection with somebody else that you just met. So how do you do that? How do you actually build a connection that feels natural in a way with somebody you have no idea who they are, you've just met them? How do you start building a connection immediately? Now, as I'm saying these things, it probably comes very naturally for someone like yourself that you're used to talking to people and stuff like that. But for people like myself, it doesn't come as naturally. So this is how the framework helps. If you're making small talk, focus on the lower levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can talk to almost anyone about the weather, about the food that you enjoy eating. What did you have for lunch? What was the movie that you just watched? What was the TV series that's new on Netflix that you just seen? You can talk about love and belonging. You can talk about your kids. You can talk about your pets. The lower in the hierarchy that you try and use as sources of inspiration for making small talk, the more chance of applicability you're going to have with the human beings that you're trying to make small talk with. So if you use this framework as a way to think about how to develop or come up with topics on the spot, it can be a lot easier because now you have a way to think about it. So that's the first thing. You can use this framework as a way to source for topics to talk about. The other thing you can do is to simply sense and respond, right? If you just met this person and you're seeing that they're wearing a really nice sweater, like the one that you're wearing right now, Jeremy, you say, oh, that's a really cool sweater. In fact, I might have seen it at one of the shops at the shopping center earlier this week. Was it from so-and-so company? Well, there you go. You can, and then also if we're doing this remotely like we are right now, you have a really interesting background, right? Yes, so many interesting, I can see a book about Polish, Hungarian, Budapest, all these, maybe they are languages that you are learning right now. I might ask you about the sports cars that are behind you. You might ask me about this picture of a rabbit that's on the back. You might ask me about the books. All these are things that if you were on the spot and you're meeting somebody for the first time, again, all of these, like what we just spoke about, using Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a framework to think about small talk. Being able to sense and respond. It might be something you see, it might be something that you hear in the person that you're speaking to right now. All these are skills and all these are ways that you can actually practice to make it less awkward when it comes to things like small talk.
Yeah, I love that. See, and this is something that I think, just because you're comfortable talking in front of people, you make that connection, the hierarchy of needs and conversation topics. And so this is a really great example of how somebody who's an extrovert can find things and analyze things around them and find things we have in common. Maybe we're, at the same movie theater, so we maybe just saw the same movie or concert or sports event, or, obviously we're both in the same environment, so we know about the weather and all that stuff. Or, a conference, we could talk about the, waiting in line for lunch. We could talk about the speaker we just saw or something like that. And I think this is why this is so brilliant. These frameworks, they help introverts find things to talk about if they're having trouble finding things to talk about. But then on the other end, they keep the extroverts from being overly obnoxious and finding things that actually resonate and connect with the other person. Because I can tell you, like, from my personal experience, again, going back to just being team lead in the past, I've gotten feedback that I don't let people speak in meetings, or I would cut people off. And, a lot of that had to do, I think, with my ADHD and just sort of having something pop in my head, needing to say it before I forgot. That's kind of one of those things where I think there's an opportunity, again, to learn from introverts where, I don't need to be constantly speaking. I could write a note down and I could just let the person finish speaking, write the note, not forget it. And when they're done, I could speak up. And so, I don't know, this is something I'd love to dig into a little bit, but I'm curious, talked a little bit about the frameworks and things extroverts can learn, but I'm curious if you've thought about this anymore. Throughout the book, are there other things that you feel as an introvert you want extroverts to know and things that they should take away from dealing with introverts? Maybe it doesn't have to do with the book exactly, but I'm curious, are there lessons that extroverts can learn from introverts, from your opinion as an introvert?
And as you were talking, there were three things that came to mind. First, I know a lot of the conversation we've had so far feels like we're pitting introverts versus extroverts.
That's true. Yeah.
I think it's really important for me to call out that it's not about against, it's not about versus, it's about how we can find a way to work better together. Some of my best friends are extroverts because they do things that come so easily to them that I don't have to. And in the teams that I form, I'm not sure about more fun. I'm pretty sure.
The fun comes naturally, and so you just sort of have more fun with them is what I meant.
But again, it's really important for me to call out that it actually takes all of us to actually work better together. And the key thing here is this, is about how do we work better together so that we don't create environments that only suit one kind of people. It suits all of us, because I do think that it's going to take all of us. The second thing was a story that came from a team that I used to lead. And on this team, there were a team of designers. They were in different parts of the world. And most of them identified as introverts. But there was one of them that was clearly much more extroverted in nature. And I inherited this. And I remember early on sitting in our team meetings where the extrovert would be speaking most of the time. Like if a meeting was an hour long, 60 minutes, that person might be having the floor for 40 minutes or so. And then for the rest of 20 minutes, maybe I will be speaking, or some of the other people on the team might be contributing for less of that time. So when I noticed this dynamic during one of our team development exercises, we spoke about this. We spoke about, how much airtime each of us actually has. And when we spoke to the introverts on the team, the people who were quieter in nature, they said that they felt like they didn't have the space or the time for their views to be heard, because this other person that was extroverted in nature seemed to take up all of the air in the room, all of that airtime. And when it came to the extrovert's turn to say how he felt, he said that he actually took up all of that time because he didn't want his introverted teammates to feel awkward, to have to feel that awkward silence. And he felt like he was doing them a service by filling up that awkward silence for them.
That's interesting.
So it really comes back down to intention. What is it that we're trying to intentionally do? If we don't speak and we don't actually design the way that we want to work better together as a team, and you can, by the way, design the way that you want to work better together. You can design the way that you want to work together and say, this is how we want to work, and this is the way we do it, and this is why we're doing it. Otherwise, you're just going to adopt a lot of culturally acceptable behavior. Not necessarily the wrong intentions, but maybe people misconstrue it as the wrong intentions. Like in the story that I just shared. In the story that I just shared, the extrovert was feeling as if he was doing a good service for his quieter teammates. He didn't want them to feel awkward. But at the same time, because of his behavior, it actually prevented quieter ideas from being heard. So you can actually design the way that you want to work. So let's talk about the chapter 9 from the book. Chapter 9 from the book that I wrote is a chapter entirely dedicated to the extroverts and ambiverts of the world who want to work better together with the quieter teammates. It can do a few things. A lot of times people like myself, the first thing is we may struggle to think about something to say when we are put on the spot. So instead of saying, hey Tim, what do you think? and then suddenly giving Tim the floor to speak up.
Just
You can
staring
always
at you.
say, you know what, Tim, look, I'm going to come to you next to ask you what you think about topic A. But before we go to topic A, I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to think about it. Let's go talk about the agenda for the day and the things that we'll get through in this meeting. So that's really just giving somebody like myself a heads up that, shortly it's going to be your turn to speak. But even in those precious few seconds, the person has the time and the headspace without the attention of others looking at them like deer or that deer in headlights kind of moment. It gives them those precious few moments to quietly think about what they want to say before they say it. It's not everyone, but there's a tendency for people like myself to think before we talk. There's a tendency for extroverts and people like yourself who tend to talk to think. Again, to be clear, this is not all the time. I do sometimes, like myself, talk to think. It's really about what happens most of the time. So that's one of the things that you can do, right? If you want to work better together, you can give somebody a heads up. Second thing you can try, if we're on a video conference, why is it that we're still relying on voice and audio as the primary method of communication? Over here on the right, we have a little chat window that we can do text chat, right?
Yep.
Why are we not treating text chat as a first-class citizen of communication? Imagine if you're meeting with hundreds of people, maybe it's a town hall. Why is it that we're only giving the floor to the people who are speaking verbally, for the people who are on camera? Why are we only giving them the attention? When you could also very effectively have a second line of communication in text chat, where people don't have to interrupt you mid-sentence. Maybe a brilliant idea did come to them, like you said earlier, Jeremy, yourself. Why not write down that idea on a piece of paper, not interrupt the person when they're in the flow? Write down that idea. When it's your turn to speak, you can speak up, and then you can say the thing that you wanted to say earlier. So there's a whole bunch of other skills or things that I've actually put in chapter 9. And again, I do all this as an effort to help us all work better together, because I really do think that we do need all of us together to get a really good job and important things done.
Yeah, I love that. I was just, as you're talking, I was kind of thinking through a lot of these things. But I just love that idea of understanding your team so well that, Tim, I'm going to give Tim a heads up before, and I'm going to start these other things. And I think that's something really important as a team lead. If you are leading a team, this is something I've done in the past, and I always thought this was really cool, but the team would do a personality test or some kind of thing. It was something we would put in a Google Drive, and everybody kind of had, a high D, or if you did a DISC assessment, everybody would kind of do the same assessment, and, or it could be something as ways I like to work. This is how I like to work, and I don't like to be called out in meetings, those things that people do and don't like to do, so that as a team lead, everybody kind of knows that. And even beyond that, not even the team lead, I mean, anybody who's just in a meeting, anybody on the team knows that Tim doesn't like to be put on the spot, right? The other thing I just love, and this is something I think even, extroverts hopefully would agree with, is especially in the age of remote work, asynchronous working is hugely important. And, if you've got people on a team, 15 people on a team, 10 people on a team, they all spend an hour in a meeting, you've just wasted 10 or 15 hours of people time. So I love that idea of synchronous collaboration, but I also love asynchronous collaboration too. And I think that's something that we shouldn't be overlooking. And again, I think that's something where an extrovert can probably learn from an introvert, that we don't always have to talk. We don't always have to have a meeting. We can absolutely collaborate through a DM, and you can get back to me when you need to. And I love that you call that out, because I think that's incredibly important.
And meetings, again, are a tool. Yeah. Maybe it is a tool that has been overused, because that is just the way that things have always been. But, if you and I were going to have a meeting, you and I in different time zones would probably have very few meetings together, just simply because meetings need us to be at the same time, online, whether we are doing our best work at that time or not, or our worst work in the middle of the night, for example. That's just the way synchronous meetings work. But there's so many other better ways that we can work better together in this day and age, asynchronously, like recording a short video of yourself And you'll be so surprised about the amazing things they can do once you get used to doing this as a skill.
Yeah, I love it. All right, Tim. So we've had you for a little while now. Before we get out of here, I've got 5 little questions I like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. But before we do that, anything else that we didn't get a chance to talk about that you think is worth calling out as it relates to being a quiet achiever? Anything you want to throw out there? I put you on the spot. I should have let you know a little bit ago. Sorry about that.
I think the most important thing I hope everyone will come to realize is that who you are is enough. I spent so many years of my life, in my career, in my own life, trying to pretend to be somebody else that I was not. Part of it was simply because there are very few role models of introverted leadership might look like. Just because we're quiet doesn't mean that we have nothing to say. Don't spend your life trying to live up to somebody else's picture of success. You can have your own. One of the things that I really hope this book can do is to serve as a beacon for other quiet, introverted leaders to actually stand up and stand out. I think recently there was a podcast by Oprah Winfrey where she was talking to the outgoing Surgeon General in the US. And in that podcast, she was asked, how do you identify introverted or extroverted? And I'm not sure about you, Jeremy, but when I've seen Oprah Winfrey perform, she, in my mind, looks like an extrovert. But in this recent podcast that she did, she says that she's absolutely an introvert percent. 100%. And she maybe used different words to describe it, but the way that she described it was these were things that she learned to do in order to do the job that she loved. And then after she's done it, she then goes home to have a quiet time to actually recharge. And I think what we need is exactly this. We need people who are quieter in nature, who have found themselves in leadership positions. We need more people to actually stand up and stand out and say that this is who I am. I'm quiet, but I'm also a leader. And the two are not mutually exclusive. And it's important because, we've been doing this for a long time already, Jeremy, but there are other people who are starting out. They might be designers, they might be engineers, they might be doing some kind of job. We need more people who are quiet and introverted in nature, who are leaders as well, to stand up and stand out so that they can serve as role models for the next generation that's coming up in our industries, so that they don't have to spend all that time pretending to be somebody that they're not. They can have somebody else to say, this is another version of success that I can have, and I don't have to be living somebody else's picture of success. So that's the thing that came to mind.
I love it, man. That's great. That's amazing. Well, I hope anyone listening, if they take away one thing from this podcast, I hope it is that. That is a beautiful thing. You do not have to be anybody else. Be yourself. All right, Tim. So I've got 5 questions I like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. First thing that comes to your mind, as an introvert, I'll give you a few seconds to think about it, and we'll edit out the silence for anyone listening at home so it'll seem like instantaneously. But first up, what is your favorite non-design book?
Ooh, non-design book. Let's talk about the most recent one. I had over Christmas a book from my partner. It is a book called Uses of Obsession. It is by a chef called Ben Shuri, who runs a restaurant in Melbourne, Australia called Attica. Ben is a chef, and in his book, he goes through his whole journey about creating a sustainable and successful restaurant. And it's so much more than you think about running a successful restaurant than just about the food that you cook. What I enjoyed about it is, in the book itself, he calls out that he himself identifies as an introvert, which is great because now people out there recognize him as a person that's a leader in his industry, and he identifies as an introvert. And he talks about not just his successes, but also what he thinks is wrong about the industry. And he gives his recipe for the obsession level bolognese, which is a recipe that my partner and I did make over the holidays. What I loved about that book was really about the timing that I got it, because it was over Christmas. We live in the country, it was quiet. I actually got time to sit down for 2 days, and I read the entire book over the course of two days. And it was such a fantastic read. If you're looking for a book to read that's not about design or your particular discipline, definitely check that one out.
I love it. That's really cool. I love all the books. Chefs seem to have wonderful books. I really enjoy Anthony Bourdain's books, and there was another I can't remember off the top of my head. I don't know what it is about authors. I just like their style. All right. Next up, what is your favorite non-design podcast?
That would be Reconsidering. So even though I mentioned Reconsidering, it's actually run by people that you might know working in the design industry. Aaron Walters, Bob Baxley, and a lady whose name I can't remember right now. But even though it's done by designers, the topics that they talk about is really, really poignant and really timely for this stage in my life, where they're talking about things that aren't really about design, but really about the things that you might be thinking about and reconsidering that actually change your perspective. That's the first podcast that comes to mind right now.
I love it. Yeah, Bob's great. I actually follow him on LinkedIn, and we're going to have him on the show at some point. Yeah, Aaron Walters, awesome. I Design Better podcast, too. And I think Meredith Black, I think, is the...
Meredith Black, that's the one.
The other one, yeah, on the show. Yeah, Reconsider, that's a good one, too. I love that. All right, next up, what is your favorite meal? This could be something you've cooked, something you've eaten out at a restaurant, something your grandma used to cook. Favorite meal?
We were talking about bolognese earlier, but I'll just go with spaghetti bolognese. Nothing more Australian than spaghetti bolognese.
That is so funny. Is that something like people actually eat down there? Or are you being sarcastic?
No, absolutely. We don't call it spaghetti bolognese. In Australia, they call it spag bol.
Okay.
But, I was originally from Singapore. And I tell you, if you ever meet a Singaporean, we love talking about food all the time. Fantastic small talk topic. In particular, street food. Yeah. But if I were to mention like 10 dishes that I really enjoy in Singapore, you probably know none of them because a lot of them are street dishes. They might be stir-fried. Simple things like chicken, rice. And you're sitting there thinking, chicken and rice? Like, what could be more boring? But then if you actually go to Singapore and you have chicken, rice, it's probably one of the better dishes that you're going to have, or stir-fried noodles. But for the purpose of this discussion, let's just go with spag balls.
I love it, man. That's awesome. Yeah, I have never been to Singapore, but I used to work for a company that had a component repair shop in Singapore. And a bunch of my team got to go a couple times. And for one reason or another, I couldn't go. But the one thing that was on my list was to go to the Michelin star chicken and rice stand in Singapore. And I was so excited about just going for that, that alone. And I heard later that was actually not even worth the wait because it was like insane, the line to get that one guy's chicken and rice. But there's like probably 1,000 other places that are just as good. But anyway, I know all about the chicken and rice. Well, I don't know all about the chicken and rice, but I've heard about the chicken and rice. And if I ever make it Singapore, that will be the first meal that I have. All right. Next up, what is your favorite vacation spot?
Hands down, Thailand. Has to be Thailand. Fantastic. It's the food, the people, the weather, the places. Fantastic. I probably don't want to share my favorite locations in case they get popular and they are no longer as quiet as they are. But hands down, the food, the people, the location, Thailand is my favorite holiday spot. I haven't been there in years. Hopefully it hasn't changed too much. But yes, I love Thailand.
I love that. Yeah, being in the States, I'm so far away from East Asia, and there's so many places that I would love to go. Thailand's on my list. Back in the day, this is the movie itself was terrible, but there's a book called The Beach I read in high school. I don't know if you're familiar with the book, but they made a movie based on the book, and it was filmed in some national park. I can't remember where in Thailand. And when the movie came out, that park got so popular. It got overrun with tourists, and they had to close it off for a certain amount of time because so many people were just like ruining it, basically. But yeah, I want to go to Thailand. It's on my list, so I'll get to go. But
yeah, I think the island you're talking about is Phi Phi Island.
Is it? Okay. Yeah, it's just so pretty, beautiful. Just I don't know. Anyway, one of those days I'll get out there. All right. Last up, what is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
I'm not sure if you consider it a design tool. But in the work that I do, I spend so much of my time writing. Whether it's writing a blog article, writing a book, whether it's writing down my private thoughts, my to-do lists, whether it's writing down notes I'm using to prepare for this podcast. And before, I used to write a lot in different places. I used to write in my physical notebook. I used to write in my Apple Notes on my iPhone, on my iPad. A game changer for me has been to actually consolidate all of my writing into one place. And for me, that one place is an app called Obsidian.
Use
All
it.
of my
Yeah.
writing is in it now. For some people, they enjoy using Notion, but for some reason or other, it didn't work for me. What I do like about Obsidian is I'm writing in Markdown, so whenever I want to transfer to a different platform or something else, I can very easily do that. But what's nice is everything is in one place now. If I were to look for something that I've written earlier, but I'm not quite sure where I wrote that down, I no longer have to go search in 10 different places. I can just go to Obsidian and just search for the words that come to mind. So Obsidian will probably be the one non-design tool that I think is indispensable for me right now.
Yeah, I love Obsidian. I use that as well. And I love Markdown stuff. I just find it really easy. I think Notion can do Markdown and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I like Obsidian. I like that it's free for one, but I like having the app. I guess there's an app for Notion too, but I like having the app on my computer. All right, Tim. Well, this has been amazing talking to you. I'm so excited we finally had you on the show. Before we get out of here, we can't forget to give yourself a plug. Let everybody know where they can find you, follow you, the book, your course, your coaching, and all that stuff. Let everybody know, where can they find you?
Well, if you're keen to check out my book, you can search for The Quiet Achiever with my name, Tim Yeo. It should take you to my website, www.thequiet.com/book. If you can buy direct. If you can't, the book is also available on Amazon as a paperback, as a hardcover. It's also available as an ebook and an audiobook that I narrated on Amazon and on Spotify, in all good bookstores everywhere. And you can buy digital copies of my book directly from my website. That's the first thing. If you enjoyed the things that I spoke about, you can sign up for my newsletter on my website as well. That's the second thing. And the third thing is, we're recording this in 2025. And I don't do this every year, but this year I've adopted the beacon word better together. A beacon word is not like a New Year's resolution, but it's kind of one all-encompassing word that will serve as a beacon to guide you through my year. And I've chosen this year for my beacon word to be better together. Because after so many years of COVID, working remotely, and even though I'm quiet and introverted in nature, I found that there is such a thing as too much quiet time. And this year, I want to intentionally go out and actually do stuff with other people. I want to be able to partner more. I want to be able to work with other people to make stuff and go live with stuff together. So very intentionally this year, I'm looking for a lot more partnerships or doing stuff with other people, things that we can do better together. Already, I'm working on a couple of partnerships that are in the research phase. Hopefully, we're going to be able to announce and talk about them publicly soon. But if you're keen to be the first to know, definitely go to my website, sign up for my newsletter. A lot of the things that we are developing, a lot of the products that are developing right now are going to help people who might be quieter in nature, people like yourself who do find these skills to be very useful. We're also looking very intentionally at how we might be able to help people who are senior in their craft, senior individual contributors. People are really good at their craft, and they also want to be leaders, but don't know how. So just a heads up, those are the kinds of things that we're looking to developing so far. I'm looking forward to developing more partnership opportunities throughout the year. But those are the three things that come to mind. Check out my book on my website, sign up for my newsletter, so that you'll be the first to know as we come up with more of these partnership opportunities in 2025.
Right on. I love it. And check out beyonduxdesign.com/episodes, and we will include all of those links in the show notes. And also, too, you didn't mention, I don't think you've mentioned the YouTube, and you post a lot. So I definitely follow Tim for a daily, almost daily, I don't know if you do a daily dose of a quiet achiever, nuggets of wisdom, I guess I'll say. You've been posting a lot and sharing a lot of videos, and I love following you online. So Tim, once again, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I definitely learned a lot from reading your book, and I'm so excited to have you contribute to the Beyond UX Design paperback copy as well. That was amazing. So just thank you for everything. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for the opportunity, Jeremy.